On a day when the U.S. Attorney General and the FBI director warn about alleged schemes against the United States, announcing charges against 13 individuals who tried to, quote, unlawfully exert influence in this country for China, we're again reminded nearly 2 weeks before the midterm elections of the importance of reliable safeguards against ever-present national security threats. That includes the elected members of Congress with intelligence and oversight roles whose fears were confirmed by the stunning Washington Post reporting on Friday about what the twice impeached and now subpoenaed ex-president had brought home with him to Mar-a-Lago. Highly sensitive intelligence on China and Iran, putting at risk, potentially, the lives of U.S. intelligence employees, our intelligence gathering methods, as well as possible retaliation. Joining us now, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. We've wanted to talk to you about so many of these things that have burst into public view, and I know you're just back from Ukraine, so we'll get through all of it. But first, we're so focused on our own pretty splendid efforts to destroy our democracy from the Republican Party in this country that we forget that there are foreign actors that represent a grave threat as well. Any reaction to the news today from DOJ?
Well, I'm not at all surprised, Nicole, and thanks for having me on. We've known for a long time that our antagonists abroad, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they've all got an interest in influencing our elections. And they do it in very different ways. We know what Russia did in 2016 with the purchase of ads on social media and the creation of fake accounts. The Chinese are a little bit more targeted. They're in the business of supporting legislators or candidates who they think might be more pro-China than others, and they do it in a much more subtle way than the Russians do. But no, I'm not one bit surprised. But like you, I must say, this is something that the Intelligence Committee and all of us need to be cognizant of. But it still feels to me like, when you've got a state like Nevada that has basically emptied their bureaucracy for counting the votes and is slowly replacing them with people who have very easy jobs because their job is simply to install Donald Trump as president. I worry kind of more about the domestic stuff than some of what I see in the Intelligence Committee. I mean,
I don't want to get too off topic, but if you read through the papers this weekend, the threats to our elections in, 2.5 weeks are so pervasive and they're so dire, and they include violence. I mean, do you think it's time to ask for friends and allies to come over and help us monitor our elections? We used to do that in other burgeoning and threatened democracies.
Yeah, no, Nicole, I'm not there yet. And I know why you're asking what you're asking, and you're not wrong, right? I mean, the kind of intimidation that is threatened around polling places. I mean, you've seen the pictures of the guys with assault weapons near boxes. That stuff is intimidating. And again, that used to be sort of the province of, I hate to use the term, but third world countries that didn't care about democracy. But no, look, this is something for us to work out ourselves. And, we at some point, the United States is going to need to collectively decide that not only are we going to oppose Russians and Chinese and North Koreans and Iranians messing around with our elections, we're not going to allow the Republican Party to do it either. And one of the most effective things we can do to take an awful lot of the vulnerabilities off the table, of course, would be to pass the Electoral Count Act in the United States Congress, because that deals with a lot of the levers that they tried to use after Donald Trump was defeated in November of 20.
The work on the Intelligence Committee used to be completely bipartisan, and it used to be really about protecting ourselves from threats abroad. Has your work changed at all now that you have to also countenance threats within?
Well, I'm happy to report, Nicole, in a world of not a lot of good news, that actually the Intelligence Committee, now that we're no longer in the business of investigating the perfect call, so-called perfect call that Donald Trump made to Ukraine, and the Russia interference in 2016, we've actually gone back to being quite bipartisan. In fact, my trip to Ukraine, which you referred to earlier, I was there with the Republican ranking member of the committee in order to send a unified message to the Ukrainians that the United States Congress is behind Ukraine. So we're doing better. We're doing better in the absence of Donald Trump in the White House.
Congressman, I don't need to tell you, but Kevin McCarthy has already threatened to cut off foreign aid and military assistance to Ukraine should Republicans retake the House. Is Zelenskyy worried about that?
Yeah, and I'm not usually in the business of defending what Kevin McCarthy says, but I think his language was there won't be a blank check. And as a purely literal matter, yes, there never has been, and no, never will there be a blank check. So I'm not sure. I'm trying to be optimistic here and hope that that the worst is not true. But look, he certainly has people in his caucus that are very important to him becoming Speaker of the House if the Republicans take the majority, some of whom do want to cut off all aid for reasons that are just probably too dark to talk about. Look, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee was side by side with me in front of President Zelenskyy saying this is something that we care about in a bipartisan way, even if there are some fringy folks, here and there who think otherwise.
What did you learn? I mean, there's nothing like being there, and there's nothing I understand like being in the room with President Zelenskyy, whose leadership acumen and ability to sort of marshal his country, not just the military, but the people, to withstand, what you see as a campaign of terror on the part of the Russians. Tell us what they're dealing with and what they need from the West.
Well, it's a very strange feeling in Kyiv right now because, on the one hand, the city's sort of going about its business. People are stopping in for coffee. They're going to work. But at any moment, they could be obliterated by one of the missiles that comes in on a daily basis. Most of it, the Russians trying to take out the power infrastructure. But it's a really strange feeling because they live under that fear, something that we don't know here in this country. On the other hand, and here's my big takeaway, from President Zelenskyy on down to the guys who are working in the lobbies of the hotel, without exception, everybody I talked to in Ukraine said, I'll tell you how this ends. This ends when every single Russian is off every single inch of Ukrainian land. And I highlight that for you right now because there's all kinds of conversation happening in the United States about negotiations. And that's fine. There should always be discussions and negotiations. But the Ukrainians are very serious about getting what they deserve, which is all of the Russians out of their country. And by the way, accountability for the war crimes that have been committed and help with the rebuilding of the country that Russia destroyed.
And you're confident that even if, I hate making any predictions, but you're confident that the Ukrainians have bipartisan support for standing with them as long as it takes to get all the Russians off of their soil?
I've become a little more humble about making predictions around the United States Congress in the last couple of years, but I am confident. That all aid to Ukraine is not going to dry up. And the reason I'm being a little hesitant to talk to you about to be specific about this is that, the fight really is in the Republican Party. And McCarthy has his political calculations right now that I'm not necessarily privy to. But I will tell you 100% confidently that the vast majority of Republicans and the vast majority of Democrats support continued aggressive aid to assist the Ukrainians.
Why do you think we can't marshal bipartisan support for protecting our own intelligence products? Why do you think your Republican colleagues aren't as worried about what Donald Trump took to Mar-a-Lago as Democrats are?
Well, it's not that they're not as worried. They're just a lot less willing to talk about it because when you cross Donald Trump in public...
Have you heard any... Have they said it in public? We'll find it, because if there's been a Republican voicing concern about the intelligence community in public, I want to show that to my viewers.
Well, that's the distinction I'm trying to draw here, right? Again, I spend a lot of time with my Republican colleagues, and many of them know what they would say if Hillary Clinton had been found with top secret SCI information in her home in New York State. They know that. They just don't want to say it publicly because if you attract the attention of Donald Trump, it's game over. I mean, Nicole, you know this, right? There were 9 votes on the Republican side for impeachment against Donald Trump, and 8 of those 9 are now gone, right? And that's just the world they live in.
What can we do about that? I mean, you sound more optimistic than you have at many points in the last 2 years. I mean, do you think that... Do you think as his presidency is sort of farther in the rear view mirror, do you think around national security that we can purge him from the pollution that he ushered in? Or do you think there's a very real threat among your colleagues that he'll be president again?
Yeah, I don't know if I am more optimistic, but I will tell you this. My Republican colleagues live in fear of winding up like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, that is to say, in a new line of work. But they also like to win, right? Mitch McConnell likes to win. And Donald Trump, other than the election of 2016, in which he received a minority of the popular vote, and he was legitimately elected by the Electoral College. But other than that, he has an unbroken string of losses. He lost the House. He lost the Senate, very narrowly, I'll admit. But a lot of what my Republican colleagues think of the future of Donald Trump politically will have to do with what happens in the election that is coming up in 2 weeks. Again, if he continues his almost unbroken streak of losing You know, Republicans don't ever want to be in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. They also don't really like to lose.